Jury selection begins in the Alex Murdaugh murder case. The disgraced attorney is accused of killing his wife and son back on June 7th of 2021. The state theorizes that the defendant was attempting to draw sympathy in the midst of his alleged financial crimes. The murders were just one event in a string of tragedies and crimes connected to the once prominent South Carolina family, which included 2 additional deaths and an alleged hired hitman. With such a convoluted case, there is so much to break down and discuss. And here to start the conversation is Law&Crime's GiGi McKelvey, who is down at jury selection right now. Thank you so much for joining me, GiGi. What can you tell us about jury selection?
Thank you, Michelle. Well, Alec arrived here at the courthouse shortly before 9 a.m. and was ushered quickly inside. So what we know about jury selection is there is a pool of 900 jurors that will be shuffled in. And so far, what we've heard from jury selection is questions about jobs, what occupations they have, what occupations their spouse has. When the judge asked if anybody had heard something about this case, every single person stood up in that courtroom, and when asked if they had not heard about the case, nobody stood up. So that tells you a little something there. Everybody knows Alex Murdaugh in Walterboro. Speaking of Walterboro, this town is alive today. It is bustling. It is in different form than normal. There are media everywhere, up and down the street, food trucks everywhere. There are spectators and protesters out here. And something that Walterboro hasn't seen in what I think could be the biggest case in South Carolina history.
Yeah, definitely a trial we are all keeping our eyes on. GiGi, thank you for that, and we'll be sure to check in with you as this case progresses. But before I introduce you now to my legal panel, we go to a report now from Law&Crime's Anjanette Levy for some more background. Take a look.
Are you guilty or not guilty of the felonies wherein you stand indicted?
Not guilty.
Alex Murdaugh and his family are well known in South Carolina's Low Country. His murder trial for the deaths of his wife Maggie and son Paul will be held in Colleton County. Population 38,462.
It's going to be a challenge, and jurors, everybody for that matter, are not necessarily good at knowing how biased they are.
Alan Turkheimer is a jury consultant and reviewed the juror questionnaire sent to prospective jurors.
I was surprised that they weren't asked about the family, Mr. Murdaugh, and the whole system there, the whole political system and the law enforcement. So I think that the idea is this questionnaire is going to be used as a springboard to more specific questioning.
The questionnaire is standard with questions such as, where do you get your news? It also asks whether a person has bumper stickers, and if so, what do they say? Prospective jurors are also asked whether they watch or listen to true crime shows or police procedurals, such as Law and Order.
There could be a hung jury.
Eric Bland, who represents some of the victims of Murdaugh's financial scheme, says he doesn't see an acquittal in the murder case.
But there is a good likelihood that he can sway 1 or 2 jurors who are from Colleton County. Remember, the Murdaughs have a big history there. They're revered there. There are still a lot of people that like them, that were the beneficiary of their good deeds, and it's not going to be an easy conviction.
Judge Clifton Newman hasn't decided just how much he'll allow the jury to hear about the financial crimes for which Alex Murdaugh faces criminal charges, but prosecutors say that is part of what motivated the murders. A decision on that could come after jury selection. For the Law and Crime Network, I'm Anjanette Levy.
Thank you, Anjanette. And with that, I have trial attorney Bob Hillay and criminal defense attorney Diane Menashe here with me to discuss this case further. Thank you so much for joining me, guys. And there is so much to talk about with this case, Diane. But how much do you think is relevant here in Murdaugh's murder charges? In other words, how much will the jury hear about his other scandals?
Well, that's really what the case is going to turn on, right? Is what the judge allows in terms of other alleged bad acts. Interesting, though, that the judge hasn't yet made a determination as to the admissibility of let's say, the financial crimes, because really, we all know as we're doing voir dire, we're really front-loading our themes and trying to indoctrinate the jury. And so these attorneys are at the disadvantage where they actually don't know what's coming in terms of those other allegations. So I think for the prosecution, the admission of those alleged bad acts is going to be everything. And then, of course, that means that for the defense, if they can keep them out, that will also be everything for them.
And Bob, how do you think the defense will go about defending Murdaugh?
I mean, I think the first thing will probably go back to when they had the pretrial, where they were saying, you know, why would someone try and divert the focus away from him by killing members of his family and placing him in the middle of a murder case? You know, that makes sense, especially if it's an area of South Carolina where he's got a lot of sympathy and there's a history with the family. But I think what's going to be important is those around him that you would expect to be supportive of him, family, friends, past colleagues who he stole millions from. You know, where are they going to fall in line in this trial? And I think that that could have an impact here.
What about the layers in this trial, Bob? There is just so many layers with the string of deaths before this and just the involvement of the family in Low Country. How is that all going to come into play?
Well, remember, the basic here is it's a murder case. So the state's got to focus on that. They got to focus on that these people were murdered, these two individuals, how they were murdered, and then they got to point to the defendant. So, for instance, like the financial crimes, the relationships, things of that nature, those would be relevant perhaps to point to this defendant, because the state's got to do two things. Number one, they got to meet their burden of proof on each element, but they also have to eliminate in a way, even though they're not required to, that there's any viable alternative for reasonable doubt purposes. So I think, you know, those are the things that the state's got to keep in mind as they approach this case.
And Diane, it is jury selection down in South Carolina, and you heard GiGi, our reporter before, talk about just how much vetting there needs to be done, because people are very well aware of this family and what they mean to the town. And when you look at such a high-profile case, jury selection, does that change anything?
Oh, it's really huge. And, you know, of course, the first question is who has heard anything about the case? And as was indicated, everyone stood up in the courtroom. The next question, though, that is really sort of the aha or the magic question to ask is, of course, in light of what you've heard or what you've seen, can you be fair and impartial? And I think this is going to be a case where a lot of those locals want to serve on the jury. And so it's really going to be, you know, there's going to be need for tricky lawyering to get jurors to really give honest answers and not answers that will ultimately get them onto the jury. So the voir dire is going to be everything in this case.
Well, Bob, how long do you anticipate jury selection to be when this is such a process, such a big deal?
Well, I think, you know, everybody in the room knows the case, okay? So we're starting with that. And this is the case, this place where it's going to get tried. So you're not going to be moving it anywhere. So the question is that knowledge going to bias their decision somehow? And that's where the exploration is going to go, because you want to try and explore, does this person have bias? Do they have some politics that might play into this? Do they have some personal animosity or something like that? So there's going to be a lot of exploration here to try and see if there's bias and then have those jurors removed.
Well, Diane, you brought up a good point. You said you feel that a lot of people want to be in on this case. Now, that could be for many different reasons. Is that going to be a challenge, though, when selecting these individuals? Because could they be in on this case for the wrong reason?
Well, it's certainly something to be cognizant of. I tried a big case here last year, and we brought in 900 jurors as well. And we had that issue, even though the duration of the trial was anticipated to be 8 to 10 weeks. We had such a volume of people that wanted to be part of the case. And, you know, that eagerness, right, can all interfere with the jurors' truthfulness as to answering the questions. And of course, what you're looking for, whether you're a prosecutor or defense, is you're looking for the right jury for that particular case. So I think that is going to be tricky. I think there's going to be a lot of jurors that want to serve on this case, given that, you know, as the intro said, this is the biggest case perhaps in South Carolina history.
Yeah, this is a case, as I mentioned before, that everyone is keeping their eyes on. Bob and I are going to take our popcorn out at some point to definitely watch this case. It's going to be a long one, too.
We wish you were here.
Exactly. Great discussion
Well,
so
it's
far.
going to be a great one. And and I'm assuming they're going to do individual voir dire because, of course, Michelle and Bob, asking the question, what do you know about the case, can, of course, potentially further taint the whole pool. So I anticipate the voir dire lasting several weeks in this, just because of that issue of not wanting to further taint the whole pool.
I mean, if jury selection is already getting us giddy, you know that this is going to be a mammoth trial that we're going to watch. All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break here on Law and Crime, but we are going to check in on some other trials we are covering. Stay with us. We'll be right back.